On the evening of May 10th, 1941, Westminster Abbey stood outlined against an orange glow from burning incendiary bombs. Overhead, close to 500 German bombers filled the darkness, their Umo engines creating a sound that Londoners had come to dread. When morning arrived, 1,436 civilians lay dead, the House of Commons was destroyed, and Britain's night defences had managed to bring down just 33 aircraft. A dismal 7% success rate that left Air Marshal Sholto Douglas furious. Here's what made it so frustrating. The RAF possessed excellent fighters. The Beaufighter carried 4 20mm cannons plus 6 machine guns, enough weaponry to tear apart a Heinkel 111 within seconds. Fighter squadrons waited across southern England, pilots ready, engines running. Night after night, they'd launch into the blackness only to find absolutely nothing. German bombing formations crossed the Channel untouched, while British fighters flew in circles, wasting fuel and hope equally. The issue wasn't bravery or hardware. It was simple physics. Human eyes, remarkable in daylight, become practically useless after dark. Your retina's rods require about 30 minutes to fully adjust to nighttime conditions. Even after adapting, you can barely see another plane beyond half a mile unless it's lit up by searchlights or passes across the moon. German bomber crews understood this perfectly. They'd navigate using the glow from burning cities, release their bombs, and disappear back into darkness before any night fighter could get close enough to see them. Ground controllers attempted various solutions. Searchlight batteries would illuminate a bomber with dozens of converging beams, then radio directions to the closest fighter. Sounds perfect in theory. In reality, the bomber would simply dive away, while the fighter pilot, his night vision completely destroyed by the bright lights, would spend 10 minutes seeing purple spots. By the time his vision recovered, the German crew would be halfway home to France, probably smoking and laughing. Early radar systems offered some promise, but they were crude devices in 1941. Chain home stations could pick up incoming raids and give rough directions, but they couldn't direct a fighter onto one specific target. The antennas were massive, fixed structures, worthless for tracking individual aircraft precisely. Airborne radar existed, certainly, but the early AI Mark IV systems fitted to Beaufighters had an effective range of barely 3 miles and a minimum range of 400 feet. That meant even if you were lucky enough to detect a bomber, you still had to close that final quarter mile using only your eyes in total darkness against a black aircraft flying at 200 miles per hour. The math was unforgiving. A typical intercept went like this. Ground control vectors you within 5 miles of a bomber formation. Your radar operator detects a contact at 2 miles. You close to half a mile, then lose radar contact because you're too close, and suddenly you're desperately searching the darkness for a visual sighting. But here's the fatal problem. The German dorsal gunner has been watching for you. The instant your outline appears against the slightly lighter sky, he starts firing. Tracer bullets streak toward your cockpit. You brake hard, lose your target, and the bomber vanishes into the night while you curse everything. Spring 1941 turned into summer. The Blitz officially finished, but German bombers continued prowling British skies. The RAF required something revolutionary. They needed somebody willing to think differently, to challenge assumptions everyone accepted as truth. They needed, though they didn't realize it yet, a physicist with a reputation for ideas so crazy they might actually succeed. Squadron leader John Cunningham grasped the paradox better than most. By late 1941, he'd become the RAF's top night fighter ace, with 20 confirmed kills, and every single victory had taught him the same harsh lesson. The conditions allowing you to see the enemy also let the enemy see you first. Full moon nights were simultaneously the best and worst. Under bright moonlight, A bomber's silhouette might be visible at 1,000 yards, sometimes further if you spotted it crossing clouds. Cunningham could stalk a Dornier, 17 close enough to fire and unleash his cannons before the crew realized death was approaching. Sounds perfect, right? Except every German rear gunner in Bomber Command had received identical training. Watch the lighter sky behind and below. That's where the RAF night fighter will appear. The geometry of night combat favored the defender by a terrible margin. Picture yourself hunting a Heinkel at 15,000 feet. You're approaching from below and behind, the classic fighter attack position. But the bomber sits between you and the sky, which even on the darkest night holds some residual light from stars, moon, or the atmospheric glow that never completely vanishes. Your aircraft, meanwhile, appears as a black shape against the even blacker earth below. The bomber's ventral gunner, the unfortunate soul lying in the belly position, has a clear view of anything approaching from beneath. He spots your silhouette at 800 yards. You haven't seen him yet. He opens fire at 600 yards. You're still scanning, squinting, hoping for a glimpse of your target. By the time you spot the bomber at perhaps 400 yards, tracer rounds are already ripping through your wing. The dorsal gunner has joined in now. Two 7.92 mm MG-15 machine guns, firing 1,000 rounds per minute combined. Your advantages, speed, maneuverability, superior firepower, mean absolutely nothing if you're dead before you can use them. Operational research analysts at Fighter Command ran the calculations and returned with depressing statistics. In moonlit conditions, German gunners achieved first detection in roughly 70% of encounters. RAF pilots spotted their targets first only 30% of the time, usually when attacking from ahead or the side, positions nearly impossible to achieve given ground-controlled interception limitations. The kill-to-loss ratio reflected this reality. For every 5 bombers destroyed, the RAF lost 2 night fighters. Unsustainable mathematics when you're already outnumbered. Pilots tried every trick available. Some approached with the moon behind them, hoping the glare would blind enemy gunners. Occasionally worked, usually didn't. German crews simply looked away from the moon, let their eyes adjust, then scanned the darker areas. Others attempted stern attacks from directly behind, presenting the smallest possible profile. But closing speed became problematic, and the approach angle gave the bomber's rear gunner an excellent field of fire. The cleverer pilots used cloud cover, diving out of the murk at close range. Brilliant when clouds cooperated, useless on clear nights, which by Murphy's Law were exactly the conditions when you could actually see well enough to fight. Weather became a maddening gamble. Overcast skies grounded the German bombers, but also made RAF interceptions nearly impossible. Clear skies brought heavy raids, but turned every night fighter into a target the moment it approached firing range. Some crews started attacking from above, despite every tactical manual screaming against it. At least you might spot the bomber's upper surfaces against the dark ground below. Except now you're silhouetted against the lighter sky for every gunner in the formation, flying into concentrated defensive fire. The casualty rate for pilots attempting this bordered on suicidal. What the RAF desperately needed was a way to close that lethal gap. Those final 600 yards where German gunners held every advantage. They needed to remain invisible while hunting. They needed, impossibly, to erase themselves from the sky. Geoffrey Pyke wasn't insane exactly. He simply operated on a different wavelength from everyone else at Combined Operations Headquarters. While other strategists discussed troop movements and naval bombardments, Pyke would derail meetings with proposals to build aircraft carriers from ice or train commandos to fight on roller skates. Lord Mountbatten tolerated him because roughly 1 idea in 10 turned out to be brilliant. The other 9 just made people uncomfortable. March 1942. Pyke hunched over his desk in Richmond Terrace, scribbling calculations on whatever paper came to hand. Envelopes, meeting agendas, once memorably on the back of a classified shipping manifest. He'd been obsessing over the night fighter problem for weeks. Every conventional approach assumed the same baseline. Aircraft are dark objects that become visible against lighter backgrounds. What if you inverted that assumption? What if you made the aircraft match the background instead? The idea wasn't entirely original. Nature had figured it out millions of years ago. Certain deep-sea fish possess photophores, light-producing organs on their undersides that match the dim glow filtering down from the surface. Predators looking upward see no silhouette, just uniform brightness. The fish effectively disappears. Pyke had read about this in a marine biology journal, borrowed from the London Library. If evolution could manage it with modified cells, surely British engineering could replicate it with electric lamps. His memo landed on desks at the Air Ministry like a grenade. Proposal for elimination of aircraft silhouettes through forward illumination. The title alone prompted raised eyebrows. The content made people reach for aspirin. Pyke argued that night fighters appeared as dark shapes because they blocked light from the sky behind them. Solution: mount high-intensity lamps on the aircraft's leading edges, nose, wing fronts, engine cowlings, calibrated to match the background brightness. The aircraft would glow just brightly enough to equal the sky's natural brightness when viewed from ahead. No darker patch, no silhouette, optical invisibility. The objections came immediately. Wouldn't the lamps make the aircraft more visible, not less? Pyke's response dripped with condescension. Only if one fails to grasp the principle of adaptive countershading, he explained patiently, as though addressing slow children. Human eyes detect contrast, not absolute brightness. A black aircraft against a grey sky creates massive contrast, instantly visible. An aircraft glowing at precisely the same brightness as the sky behind it? Zero contrast, invisible. Someone pointed out that sky brightness varies constantly. Altitude, time of night, moon phase, cloud cover. Every variable shifted the target brightness. Pyke had anticipated this. The lamps would need variable intensity controls adjusted by the pilot based on conditions. Not elegant, but workable. Besides, rough adjustment would suffice. You didn't need perfect matching, just close enough to eliminate the sharp silhouette that enemy gunners relied upon. The Air Ministry remained skeptical. Resources were stretched impossibly thin. Every pound spent on Pyke's lighting scheme meant one less spent on radar development or aircraft production. Why gamble on an eccentric's theory when conventional solutions were showing promise? The new AI Mark 8 radar could detect targets at 4 miles. Surely improving radar made more sense than mounting fairy lights on fighters. But Pyke had an ally, Wing Commander Derek Jackson, an RAF officer who also happened to be a spectroscopist. Jackson understood photometry, luminance matching, and the physics of human vision. He ran Pyke's calculations properly and came back amazed. The theory was sound, not just plausible, actually sound. Jackson carried enough credibility to force a second look. By June 1942, Pyke had secured limited funding for preliminary tests. Not much, enough for a small team at the Telecommunications Research Establishment to mock up a prototype system. The official project designation was Airborne Diffused Lighting. Pilots immediately dubbed it Pyke's Folly. The name that eventually stuck came later, borrowed from an American vaudeville song about a character who possessed the power of invisibility. Yehudi lights, as in, who's attacking us? Yehudi. You don't see him? The engineering team at TRE Defford stared at their assignment with a mixture of fascination and bewilderment. They'd expected mirrors, some clever arrangement of reflective surfaces that would bounce skylight around the aircraft. Instead, Pyke's specifications called for tungsten filament lamps, rheostats, and precise photometric measurements. This wasn't camouflage in any traditional sense. This was active counter-illumination, and it violated every instinct trained into them about making aircraft less visible. Here's what made it so counterintuitive. For centuries, military camouflage had meant making things darker. Dull paint, dark colors, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Night bombers were painted matte black for precisely this reason. The notion of making an aircraft brighter to hide it struck most people as completely mad. But the physics were irrefutable once you understood how human vision actually detects objects in low-light conditions. The human eye doesn't see objects, it sees contrast. Your retina compares the brightness of adjacent areas and reports differences to your brain. A dark aircraft against a lighter sky creates a sharp brightness gradient. That edge, that boundary between different brightness levels, is what your visual system latches onto. Remove the gradient, and the boundary vanishes. The object effectively ceases to exist as far as your perception is concerned. The team needed to quantify exactly how bright the lamps should be. Too dim and the aircraft remains darker than the background, still visible. Too bright and you'd create a glowing beacon that German gunners could spot from miles away. The answer lay in careful photometric measurement. Using sensitive brightness meters, they measured sky brightness under various conditions. Clear night with quarter moon, approximately 0.02 candelas per square meter. Overcast with ground glow from cities, 0.01 candelas. Bright moonlight, as high as 0.1 candelas. The lamps themselves presented fascinating challenges. Standard aircraft navigation lights were far too bright, designed to be visible at several miles. What Pyke needed were low-intensity sources that could be precisely dimmed. The engineers settled on modified landing lights with variable transformers. Each lamp would mount flush with the aircraft's skin on forward-facing surfaces. The nose cone, the leading edges of wings, the engine nacelles, and the propeller hubs. But here's where it got properly clever. The lights only worked when viewed from specific angles. Approach the aircraft from the side or rear, and you'd see the lamps as bright spots, actually making the aircraft more visible. The system only provided invisibility when the enemy gunner looked directly at the approaching fighter, which, fortunately, was exactly the scenario that mattered. German rear gunners scanning behind and below their bomber would look straight into the forward-facing lamps, which from their perspective would perfectly match the sky brightness behind the fighter. October 1942 brought the first bench tests. Engineers mounted a lamp array on a movable platform in a darkened hangar while observers positioned themselves at measured distances. The lamps were energized and adjusted at 0.30 candelas per square meter, far too bright. The platform glowed like a small constellation. Dial it down to 0.10 candelas, still obviously visible. Down further, at 0.05 candelas, something remarkable happened. One observer reported the platform had simply stopped being there. The edge detection that normally outlined objects had failed. The brain, receiving no contrast signal, filled in the space with uniform sky tone. They moved the tests outdoors on moonless nights. A Wellington bomber, obsolete as a frontline aircraft but perfect for experimental work, sat on the airfield while technicians fitted lamp assemblies. Observers walked towards it from 500 yards in darkness. Without lamps, clearly visible at 300 yards as a darker mass. With lamps properly adjusted, nothing. Even at 100 yards, observers reported they couldn't determine where the aircraft began and the sky ended. The Wellington lumbered down Defford's runway on the evening of November 15, 1942. its Pegasus engines straining against the additional weight of experimental equipment. Flight Lieutenant Peter Oliver sat in the right-hand seat, deeply unconvinced that bolting lamps to an aircraft would achieve anything except making it an easier target. In the rear position, Squadron Leader Harold Button operated the rheostat controls, ready to adjust lamp intensity based on Oliver's instructions. The test protocol was straightforward. Climb to 8,000 feet, fly a straight course, while a chase aircraft approached from various angles and distances. The chase crew would report visibility ranges. Simple enough, except everyone involved expected the Wellington to glow like a Christmas tree the moment those lamps energized. Button flicked the first switch. 6 lamps on the nose assembly came alive, each producing roughly 0.03 candelas per square meter. Oliver braced himself, expecting blinding glare to flood the cockpit. Instead, nothing changed. The lamps were so carefully calibrated and directed forward that even from the pilot's seat, mere feet away, they produced no noticeable illumination inside the aircraft. All their output projected ahead and slightly outward into the observer's line of sight. The radio crackled. The chase Beaufighter was positioning at 3,000 yards astern, slightly below, perfect firing position for a German bomber's defensive gunner. The pilot's voice came through. "Beginning approach now. Cannot see you yet. Stand by." 30 seconds passed. 2,000 yards. Still negative visual contact. "Your navigation lights are off, correct?" "Correct," Oliver confirmed. Everything except the experimental lamps was dark. 1,500 yards. This is extraordinary. I should be seeing your silhouette by now. 1,000 yards. Still nothing. The Beaufighter pilot sounded genuinely unsettled. At this range, on a normal night, even with minimal moonlight, a Wellington would be clearly visible. A darker patch blocking stars, a recognizable shape. But the forward-facing lamps were emitting just enough photons into the observer's retina to precisely match the background brightness. No contrast, no detection. At 800 yards, the Beaufighter pilot finally reported, "I've got something very faint. Could be you. Could be my imagination." At 600 yards. "Confirmed visual. I can make out your shape now, but only just. If I weren't specifically looking for you, I'd miss you entirely." In combat, that translated to a German gunner having perhaps 2 seconds to react instead of the usual 15 or 20, utterly inadequate time to traverse a gun, aim, and open fire. They ran the test 17 times that night under varying conditions. Each approach confirmed the same result. Detection range collapsed from the normal 2,000 yards to somewhere between 600 and 800 yards. The lamps didn't make the Wellington completely invisible. Physics wouldn't allow that, but they reduced its visible signature by roughly 70%. That margin meant life or death. The skeptics started converting. Wing Commander Jackson flew as an observer on the 3rd night of trials. He'd believed the theory, but needed to see the practical application. After watching a Wellington literally fade from view at 1,500 yards, he returned to Earth, pale and shaken. "It works," he told the assembled engineers. "It actually bloody works. We need this on operational aircraft immediately." Technical challenges remained. The lamp assemblies added 90 pounds of weight, insignificant for most aircraft, but still requiring careful balance calculations. Electrical systems needed modification to handle the additional load. Most critically, pilots needed training in how to adjust intensity. Set the lamps too bright for conditions, and you'd achieve the opposite of invisibility. Too dim, and the effect disappeared. It required judgment, practice, and a feel for ambient light levels. Engineers began designing production units, simplified controls, ruggedized housings, installation procedures that wouldn't require dismantling half the aircraft. By January 1943, they had a system ready for operational trials. The question now, Which squadrons would receive this bizarre new weapon first? Coastal Command got there first, which surprised precisely no one who understood the politics of scarce resources. Fighter Command wanted Yehudi lights for night intruders, but Bomber Command claimed priority for Pathfinder aircraft. While they bickered, Air Marshal John Slessor at Coastal Command quietly secured the initial production run. His reasoning was impeccable. U-boats were slaughtering Atlantic convoys, and maritime patrol aircraft desperately needed any edge that would let them close on surfaced submarines before lookouts spotted them. June 1943. Vickers Wellington. Mark 13 aircraft from 172 Squadron at Chivanor received the first operational installations. These weren't the glamorous night fighters that captured public imagination. They were workhorses fitted with ASV Mark III radar, depth charges, and now Pyke's lighting system. The tactical problem they faced mirrored the night fighter dilemma exactly. Approach a surfaced U-boat from too far out, and lookouts would spot you in time for an emergency dive. The submarine would vanish beneath the waves, depth charges would bracket empty water, and another convoy ship would die tomorrow. The standard approach altitude was 4,000 feet. At that height, on a moonlit night, a patrolling Wellington became visible to sharp-eyed lookouts at roughly 2 miles. The submarine needed only 30 seconds to dive. Hatch clangs shut, ballast tanks flood, boat angles down. By the time the Wellington reached attack position, it would be dropping depth charges on a target already 50 feet under, nearly useless. With Yehudi lights properly calibrated, that detection range collapsed. Flight Lieutenant Marcus Campbell achieved the first confirmed kill using the system on July 3, 1943, attacking U-607 northwest of Cape Finisterre. His after-action report noted, maintained 4,200 feet during approach. Lamps adjusted to intensity setting 4. Visual acquisition of surface submarine at 1.2 miles. Observed no reaction from conning tower lookouts until weapons release at 400 yards. 6 depth charges straddled target. Submarine broke up with violent explosion. Post-war records confirmed U-607 went down with all hands, her lookouts never having transmitted a warning that an aircraft was inbound. The mathematics were brutal from the German perspective. Reducing detection range from 2 miles to half a mile cut reaction time from 90 seconds to roughly 20, insufficient for a safe dive. U-boat crews began reporting ghost aircraft that appeared without warning from the darkness. Morale in the submarine service, already strained, took another hit. By August 1943, installations had expanded to Lee Light Wellingtons, aircraft that carried powerful searchlights for illuminating submarines during the final attack run. The combination proved devastating. Approach invisibly using Yehudi lights, then at 600 yards flip on the Lee light and blind the lookouts while simultaneously illuminating the target for the bombardier. U-boat kills per sortie increased by 47% for equipped squadrons. Fighter Command finally secured their allocation in September. Number 23, Squadron at Little Snoring received modified Mosquito Mark IIs fitted with the lighting system. Their mission, night intruder operations over occupied France. The tactic was exquisitely simple. Orbit known Luftwaffe night fighter bases at dusk and dawn, catching German aircraft during takeoff or landing, vulnerable moments when pilots concentrated on flying rather than watching for threats. The Mosquitoes would lurk at 8,000 feet, pilots adjusting lamp intensity to match the twilight conditions. German fighters would lift off, navigation lights blazing during the vulnerable climb-out phase. The Mosquito would dive, close to 400 yards, invisible against the darkening sky, and open fire with 4 20mm cannons. By the time ground observers realized an attack was happening, a Bf-110 or Ju-88 would be cartwheeling into the trees in flames. Number 415, Squadron at Bircham Newton received installations in October for anti-shipping strikes. Number 456 Squadron RAF at Valley got theirs in November for maritime patrol. Slowly, quietly, Yehudi lights spread through squadrons where the tactical advantage justified the installation complexity. Flight Lieutenant David Williams brought his Mosquito around for the third time, orbiting the German transport route at 9,000 feet. Below, a Junkers Ju-52 droned westward, flying supplies to units in Normandy. Standard procedure dictated Williams should attack from astern and above, the transport's blind spot. But tonight, he wanted to test something. He adjusted his Yehudi lamp intensity to setting 6, matching the ambient glow of twilight at this altitude, and positioned himself directly ahead of the Ju-52, head-on approach, absolutely suicidal by conventional doctrine. The front gunner would see him coming from a mile away. He closed from 2,000 yards. The Junkers flew straight and level. No evasive action. 1,500 yards. Still no reaction. Williams could see the cockpit clearly now. 2 pilots visible in the greenhouse canopy. They weren't looking at him. They were looking through him, their eyes registering nothing but uniform sky tone, where a Mosquito should be screaming towards them. 1,000 yards. The front gunner, positioned in the glazed nose, should be hammering away by now. Nothing. Williams felt sweat trickling despite the cold. This was insane. He was flying directly at them. At 600 yards, he squeezed the firing button. 4 Hispano cannons erupted, 20mm shells walking up the Junkers fuselage. The transport staggered, rolled left, and began its death dive. Williams passed overhead, close enough to see the front gunner frantically traversing his MG-15, finally aware he was under attack. 3 seconds too late. Combat reports from late 1943 and early 1944 told the same story repeatedly. Equipped aircraft were closing to what crews called knife fighting range without drawing defensive fire. Squadron leader James Wheeler from 415 Squadron recorded 11 attacks on German coastal convoys between October and December 1943. In every engagement, his Beaufighter received no defensive fire until after his first burst struck home. His after-action summaries grew almost monotonous. Approached from 270 degrees relative, no reaction observed until weapons release. Target engaged at 500 yards. The statistics bore out what individual reports suggested. Squadrons equipped with Yehudi lights showed a 73% increase in successful attacks compared to their pre-installation baseline. More tellingly, combat losses dropped by 41%. Fewer German gunners getting first shot meant fewer RAF crews going into the channel. German intelligence pieced together fragments of information, but struggled to understand what they were facing. Luftwaffe pilot debriefs mentioned Geisterflugzeug, ghost aircraft that appeared without warning. U-boat lookouts reported similar phenomena. One surviving report from U-boat command, dated March 1944, noted, "Recurring reports from returning boats describe aircraft materializing at close range without prior visual detection. Lookouts report clear visibility conditions and proper scanning procedures. Recommend investigation of possible British technological countermeasure." They investigated, of course. Captured RAF aircrew were interrogated about new detection avoidance systems. None knew enough technical details to explain properly. The few who understood the principle tried describing it. Lamps on the nose, sir, matched to sky brightness. German intelligence officers filed these reports alongside claims of death rays and jet-powered bombers, the desperate fantasies of broken men saying anything to make interrogation stop. The truth was simultaneously simpler and more sophisticated than they imagined. No exotic technology, no revolutionary physics, just careful photometry and an understanding of how human vision processes contrast. Pyke had weaponized a principle that deep-sea fish had been using since the Cambrian period. By February 1944, over 200 aircraft across Coastal Command, Fighter Command, and specialist units carried Yehudi installations. Maintenance crews could install a complete system in roughly 18 hours. Pilots learned intensity adjustment procedures during standard checkout flights. The system had transitioned from experimental curiosity to operational weapon with remarkable speed. Yet even as it proved its worth in combat, Yehudi lights were already becoming obsolete. Technology was advancing along parallel tracks, and one particular development was about to render optical camouflage almost irrelevant. The telecommunications research establishment at Malvern had been working miracles with magnetrons while Pyke fiddled with lamps. By autumn 1943, centimetric radar operating at 10 centimeter and later 3 centimeter wavelengths began rolling off production lines. The AI Mark 10 radar set fitted to Mosquito night fighters could detect a bomber at 8 miles and maintain lockdown to 400 feet. Suddenly, closing that final visual gap mattered far less. You didn't need to see the enemy anymore. The radar would guide you to gun range, regardless of ambient light, sky conditions, or how well the target had been camouflaged. Fighter Command pilots noticed the shift immediately. The new radar sets were so reliable that crews developed tactics entirely divorced from visual acquisition. You'd follow the blip on your scope, close to 800 yards based purely on range data, and only then look up to confirm your target before firing. The Yehudi lights still worked brilliantly. German gunners still failed to spot approaching fighters, but the advantage had become redundant. You were already inside their reaction envelope before visual detection mattered. Coastal Command experienced the same transition. ASV Mark 6 radar could spot a submarine's conning tower at 6 miles in moderate sea states. U-boats diving to avoid aircraft were now reacting to radar detection, not visual spotting. Whether the attacking Wellington glowed or remained dark made little difference when the submarine was already submerging, based on radar warning receivers detecting your emissions from beyond visual range. By June 1944, production of Yehudi light installations had quietly ceased. Existing systems remained operational. No point removing equipment that still functioned. But new aircraft received radar upgrades instead. The Air Ministry's allocation priorities shifted entirely toward electronic warfare. Engineers who'd spent months perfecting lamp assemblies found themselves reassigned to radar countermeasure projects. Geoffrey Pyke never saw his invention fade into obscurity. He'd already moved on to his next obsession, Habakkuk, the proposed aircraft carrier constructed from picrit, a mixture of ice and wood pulp. That project consumed him through 1943 and early 1944, before being cancelled as impractical. His mental health, always fragile, deteriorated steadily. On February 21, 1948, Pyke was found dead in his London flat, an overdose of barbiturates beside him. The coroner recorded suicide. He was 54. The Yehudi light program disappeared into classified files and stayed there for decades. Post-war aviation histories mentioned radar advances extensively, but said nothing about optical camouflage. Partly this was standard security classification. Even obsolete technology remained secret in case future applications emerged. Partly it was simple historical oversight. Radar made for dramatic storytelling. The boffins who won the war with electronic wizardry. Lamps mounted on aircraft noses. Less compelling, apparently. Yet Pyke's fundamental insight, that you could make an object invisible by actively controlling how it emits or reflects radiation, planted seeds that would bloom decades later. Modern stealth aircraft like the F-117 and B-2 use precisely the same principle, just applied to radar instead of visible light. Their shapes and coatings control radar reflection to minimize detection. Active cancellation systems on some naval vessels emit sound waves to cancel their acoustic signature. Military research programs investigate adaptive camouflage systems, where surface panels adjust brightness and color to match surroundings. The US Navy experimented with Yehudi lights on TBM Avenger torpedo bombers in 1945, designating it Project Yehudi. Results mirrored British findings: dramatic reduction in visual detection range. But by then, American night fighters carried superb radar. The system saw no operational deployment. Canadian and Australian forces reviewed the technology post-war, but concluded radar had made it obsolete before it could mature. Today, buried in declassified Air Ministry files at the National Archives in Kew, technical reports gather dust: lamp specifications, installation diagrams, combat effectiveness analysis showing 73% improvement in attack success rates. Geoffrey Pyke's name appears occasionally in footnotes, usually alongside Habakkuk or his earlier escape from a German prison camp in 1915. The mirror trick that made night fighters invisible? Forgotten by everyone except a handful of aviation historians who stumble across those archived reports and think, "Bloody hell, that actually worked."